All right, folks, we will go ahead and get started. I think that in the event that folks do add one in the conversation, I'll just add them in the waiting room. I'm excited to welcome you to our second COVID-19 conversation with Dr. Claire King, who is a professor of Interdisciplinary Studies at the Stella and Charles Guttman Community College, part of the CUNY system. I'm excited for her to lead our conversation today. And I'll turn it over to her to sort of introduce herself more broadly and give us a bit more background behind the conversation, and then we can dive in.
Okay, thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you, Phoebe. I am a firm believer that whenever I give a talk or facilitate a conversation, that those who are supposed to be here are here. So I really welcome you, Phoebe, for coming, and thank you, Thomas, for setting this up. When I heard about the topic, it really interested me because of my role as an educator of many years and in this institution of Guttman Community College. I'd like to share my screen at this point and pull this up so that we can start. So at Guttman, we are part of the CUNY system, the City University of New York. And I'm not sure because at least the pictures of you folks are on my side here. I don't know if you could read this, but one of the students really brought me up to speed in one of our online classes when he said, at the end of this, I want to ask myself, what do you want to stand for? And that has been a recurrent question of mine as we go through this time together. And I think the aims of the Center for Civic and Moral Educational Initiatives at Harvard is often is really about, you know, what does it mean to live a good life, to be a good person? The City University of New York, if you're not familiar with it, is the largest metropolitan university in the United States. We are also the public university at the center of the global pandemic, to be quite honest, at least in the United States. We have, as part of our university, there are 25 colleges, and as you see, over almost 300,000 students. CUNY, as it is called, has been around for a while and was really founded to serve the immigrant population that was coming into New York City and to educate them. And even as recently as 2018, we have 7 CUNY colleges that are among the top 10 that bring the highest mobility rates to students who attend. And who are the students of CUNY? Well, they are very much like those of Guttman Community College, where I am. And Guttman is the most recent addition to the City University of New York. We were founded 12 years ago, in 2012, to really address what would it be like to put all of the high impact practices, all of the evidence-based and researched practices to bear in an educational, higher educational setting for the students who could benefit the most. Our students are typical college-age students. They come to us between the ages of 17 and 19, which is unusual in a community college setting. Our students are Black and brown, mostly immigrants. They are caregivers, they're rent payers. We have a large number of students with disabilities. And that was something that the planners of this CUNY college did not anticipate when they were thinking of who could benefit the most from higher education with the most innovative pedagogical interventions and practices. Shortly after we began, if you looked at some of the materials I sent out earlier, I gave you a sense of our degree pursuing students, a sort of a profile of our demographic. And of those who graduated last year, 38% of those students identified disclosed a disability or are neurodiverse in some way. And that surprised us. We are a Hispanic serving institution. Many of our students are English language learners, and they are almost unequivocally low income. Many of them are the actual breadwinners for their families. They work full time, and part of Guttman's model is they must go to school full time as well. So they are a very significant, the CUNY student, I should say, is a very significant part of New York City's low wage essential workers. We're looking very eagerly today in New York, today in Albany, the capital. Governor Cuomo will be deciding the state budget. We've been told that more than likely there will be a catastrophic cut to funding for CUNY at this time. And that's something that really our students are used to, I'm going to say. In talking with them about what I wanted to speak about with you all today, with both of you today, is really how do students who have come so far as to be first in their families to come to college, to be at least a quarter of the students, about a quarter of our students are more than likely undocumented. The other 75% are eligible for Pell Grants. And their experience thus far to have brought them here puts them in an entirely different category than I would say most students in the United States. None of them are residential, unlike on your campus. Students had to leave and bring their belongings with them to go home or to go overseas or wherever home is. And at this point, our students are at home, and they are working on the remote courses that we are teaching. I noticed also that last week when the professor was speaking in this series and talking about the full class schedule, full sessions, we can't do that in CUNY. We can't have a full 90-minute or lab time class session because we have so many students who don't have the technology, or if we send them home with a laptop when we had to close in March, they don't have Wi-Fi or reliable Wi-Fi. Most of our students live in public housing and live with extended family members. So the children, their siblings or cousins of the extended family are trying to take their classes with the New York Department of Ed, K-12, at the same time that our students are trying to do their coursework, at the same time as any parent in the home that has been furloughed or is looking for work also needs to use the same piece of technology. So we have very few synchronous moments online with our students. When we do, I always start once a week with each class. I always start with kind of a check-in. And as you can see from the slide here, one of my classes, we started with remembering what we've lost. And then we had another slide of let's think about what we gained. And as you can see from the things here, these are things that are very much like what all of us who've experienced the pandemic have lost and mourn. But it's really important for us, for those few minutes that we can have students synchronously, to be very aware of the experiences that under which they are studying. We have, in fact, I see one of my students just joined us, Melissa, and she was saying to me the other day when I called and said, would you like to be on this conversation with me? And she graciously agreed. And she said, but Claire, if we have a phone call, it's hard because, you know, I've got teenage brothers in the house and it's really loud because there's not so many rooms that we can go in. So that's another piece of why our students can't have synchronous, lengthy class sessions. It's all mostly asynchronous time. Our college has, recognizing the situations in which our students are struggling, has put up a web page. I'm sure that Harvard has done, and schools all over the place do, but it's very interesting and sobering to us that, whoops, let me go back here, that of the different possible things that students can click on for more help or information, that of those, we have the most clicks every day on food availability for families who have no jobs to go to right now. We have students who need emergency funding for transportation if they are trying to get down to Manhattan. Most of our students live in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Harlem. And if they're trying to get to Manhattan so that they can deliver food on their bikes, they sometimes need to get a ride all the way down from where they are. And so that may be one of the next thing that people are clicking on. And surprisingly too, to us, but not surprising once we know who our students are, unfortunately, you can't see one of the bottom categories, which is called helping others. That's been the third most clicked on category during this COVID online learning time, where students are seeking assistance, but also seeking how is it that they themselves can be givers in this. When we were starting taking our classes online, I have a second semester freshman class, and I asked them how they felt about this, and pretty much echoed exactly what faculty were feeling at the same time. In all of the ways that we are trying to figure this out, especially for our neurodiverse students who we are preparing for, but students who may not be able to follow some of the visual and audio prompts, especially with limited technology. One thing that my faculty colleagues and I have noted throughout this time is I get email after email after email of students apologizing that they can't get their assignments in, or that something will be late, or that they are working on it. Could I give them another day? This blows my colleagues and my minds, because when we think of what it is that we are asking our young people to do during this pandemic, and those among us who can benefit the most from education and have the least resources to access it, you know, I don't know if those of you who are on this call are also educators, but it's been a real soul-searching time for my colleagues and myself to say, why should our students care about an x-axis and a y-axis? Why should they care about a legal ruling from the 1970s? You know, we are sparsing our curriculum down to the most essential learning outcomes. And that word essential has been one that we've talked about a lot, my students and I. What is essential during this time? What do we deem essential, and how do we care for what is essential? So students are beginning to say this more and more. This student, you know, I just put this quote here and I put it in one of the readings that I gave to you, and realizing how much their voices need to be heard. And to that point, I'd really like, Melissa, would you be willing to unmute yourself, as I've said here? And, or Thomas, do you have to unmute Melissa? I don't know if participants are able to do so. But, okay, so I'm asking Melissa, would you be willing to just kind of talk about your experience day to day over this time that we have been online and being right in the heart of the national pandemic in New York City? Like, what's a typical day like, and what are your thoughts about it?
Well, my typical day is, before the pandemic, was waking up at 6 o'clock, making sure I catch the train on time to make it to the city, because I live in Brooklyn. And having all day just to wander around the city when I'm not in class. And now that this pandemic has struck, I'm just stuck at home, realizing all the things that I didn't take advantage of before. And now I'm just home, still able to do schoolwork, but not as much. I feel like the idea of my dependence taken away in a sense during this pandemic.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to mute yourself for a second, please. Actually, Melissa has just come kindly enough from an info session online for joining the Honor Society for Community College students. And so I'm not sure, Melissa, if you're able to lower the voice of the folks in the meeting also on your computer or not when you're talking with us. I'm not sure if that's possible. Melissa, can you speak to something you told me last night was really powerful, and it's something that so many of our professors keep shaking our heads at with you guys. You know, you said something about hope and about obstacles. Can you speak to that again, please?
Well, since our community college is so diverse, I've met so many people that have been going through situations in life where they never thought they'll make it to college. And the sense of being able to still stay in college during this pandemic, it's just another bump in the road for us in a sense, because we went through so many obstacles as being low income people, being the struggles of not having a place to stay and stuff. We have that hope of this pandemic. There has to be a light at the end of this tunnel in a sense, and having that hope that if I'm able to still do schoolwork, I could get that degree that I want. This pandemic has to be over in a sense, and have that hope.
Mm-hmm. And what you're saying is not atypical for almost every student that faculty and staff talk with during this time. We keep being amazed at your bravery. And, you know, like I actually was teaching one of my synchronous classes when a student, and again, like 15 minutes long, is about as long as some students are able to give time to the computer if they're not able to work or having brothers or sisters that need it. And so one of the students said, "I'm here with my dad's body right now. I'm waiting for the ambulance to come. So I can't stay on long. I'm sorry." You know, this brings us to a whole different level. And when we look at our students too, those of whom are undocumented and will not be receiving any stimulus checks or unemployment if they are working off the books, so to speak, it brings so much to bear about what is education for and how does it benefit us. And it's really time, I do believe, it is truly and really time for the young people who are impacted the most severely in this pandemic, not only in New York, the hot spot of the coronavirus, but around the world, for those students to truly unmute themselves. And I'm looking and hoping that perhaps some of the folks who are listening today might be able to help us think about ways that we can let our students unmute themselves at this time. Something like StoryCorps or short audio bites of hope from students who feel hope when others feel ennui or paralysis or fear. For students who feel hunger and can have hope at the same time. I think we need to have them unmute themselves, but we need a way for them to be heard. So I'd like to open the conversation right now to those of you who are listening And I would just love to hear your feedback. And if you have any questions for Melissa or myself, my goal is not to valorize or sentimentalize the experience of CUNY's students right now, but it is to tell a true story. And I'd love to hear your input on that, please.
So Phoebe or Deborah, if one of y'all just wants to unmute, I think you guys have that ability. You guys can also just type a question or comment into the chat box. And Dr. King and I can read it from there if you would like.
Hi, this is Deborah. Thank you so much. This is, it's very moving. I just had a whole range of emotions listening. And yeah, I just find each day just feeling very, like this is just so, it's so heart-wrenching on so many levels, and then also just so really moving and inspiring. You see the resilience and the determination and hope, and I loved what Melissa was saying, you know, just having to really believe that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm wondering how about this social and emotional dimensions of this, and how are, and you may have addressed this, I signed on a little bit late, so sorry if you did and I missed it. But I'm wondering what specific ways that students are supported to you know, really take care of themselves and to build that emotional resilience. Is there, for instance, a mindfulness component, right? And I did see this, but so maybe I'm asking it around the mental health to just talk a little bit more about what that has involved in terms of support for students.
Sure. And Melissa, you can join me on this, but we have a huge array of classes of yoga online classes that our instructors are doing with students. We have small groups of online therapeutic sessions. And again, we know this is not unlike those services that are being offered at colleges around the world to uphold our young people at this really fragile time. But our numbers are smaller, and we're able to be more intimately aware of the situations. You know, one of our students we have a number of homeless students, many in the CUNY system actually, but one of our students who is sleeping on the Staten Island ferry because it goes 24 hours a day. Now that he has had a problem because it's not going 24 hours a day now because there's low ridership in this crisis. And so being able to help plug him into the services for mental health, but more importantly for housing at this time. You know, we're trying to be as aware as we can through our staff who make phone calls or text our students, our advising staff. Melissa, do you have anything further to say to Deborah's question about, you know, well-being at this time?
Well, as a student, like there's a lot of, as you mentioned, Professor Claire, that there's a lot of abilities that we could access through CUNY. Especially Guttman has given us many opportunities to ask for help as a leader, as peer mentor in our college, and a PTK, a vice president leader. As a leader, I have the opportunity to reach out to many kids and give them the opportunity of having that extra help of you're not alone. We're always here. We're all going through this no matter what, and giving them that leaning hand that if you need help, we're here, and help trying to control that stress that we all have, that anxiety during this pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We have one comment in the chat box asking how Guttman was able to identify who was considered essential and what was involved in determining what essential kind of meant, and then what conversations about sustaining and elevating essential exist beyond this pandemic.
I heard the first part of the question, Thomas, that I'm able to answer quickly, and I'll need to hear the second part again. But probably our essential employees would be similar to those in any university, because we are situated in downtown Manhattan, although really none of our students come from that locale. So our public safety folks have taken, really are in the building as essential employees, and our HR, our business office, et cetera, everyone is working remotely. No one is allowed into the building. And, you know, the streets of downtown Manhattan, where we are situated, are virtually empty. And so the essential employees actually in our setting, because we are small as a startup college, and if you looked again at our demographics on the papers that I had sent out, you would see that we have, you know, very small numbers. So everyone is working remotely at this time. And the second part of your question had to do with the word essential. Can you read that again for me, Thomas, please?
Yeah, and Phoebe, I don't want to misinterpret what you're saying. I think I might have when I asked this question initially. Now that I'm reading it again, what I think you're asking is about this page actually in front of us on the screen share. And that is, how did Guttman decide what would be considered essential information? Like, how did you all decide that food availability, housing, mental health, and emergency funds, to domestic and gender-based violence survivors, et cetera, how all of that content would be considered essential during this time? And what role and conversations have you all had regarding this information continuing to be considered essential going forward? That's what I think the question is about.
It's a great question in terms of going forward. These categories, and I'm sorry, as I said, that there's a whole other line full of 4 other categories that are cut off here because I don't have it live up, but there's one called unplugging, of how to just completely, you know, try to de-escalate yourself or whatever. It's mostly what our wellness personnel see as needs throughout the year. We have a single stop through all of CUNY. Colleges have this, where students can go to seek any kind of assistance that would keep them from being able to stay in school. And this kind of assistance is largely
donor-based, grant-based. We have rent, able to be paying rent, legal assistance if people get into some issues, and then food obviously is such a big one. I'm not, as far as going forward, I can't really see that any of these things are not what we already have as essential, you know, that we see as essential. And you're welcome to look at our website to see what are the other 4 categories that we deem essential. And that's really what we talk about with education for people who are marginalized and minoritized in higher education and have not been particularly well served by it, that all of these things that are peripheral, it seems, to the object of getting one's degree, we've centralized. We know that, you know, our students are not lazy. Our students are not demotivated, you know, but in order to keep and persist to degree, all of these parts are essential for obtaining an education. So hopefully that answers your question.
Something that I was really interested in reading the materials that you sent us also the questions folks have asked too, and then hearing your context, I think one is just noting how much of this conversation about the experiences of our students in community colleges is missing from the national discussion about what it means for schools to be open and then to think about reopening. I think that it's a lot right now because of the article written, the op-ed written, I guess, by the president of Brown, President Paxson, in which I will admit that I personally, like when I first read it, I was like, wow, this really sounds great. I think this is doable. But then in hearing all of this and seeing that article, I think really did sort of misidentify a lot of the issues that folks will have in what it means to be open as an institution during this pandemic. I guess I'm wondering, for anyone on the call, what are ways that you think that schools can mimic what Guttman is doing? Because I think this is the important work. Like, it matters, yes, that the school is open, but also that when that school is open, there are the right resources for the student to still be supported on the periphery so that they are pursuing their degree, but also still have access to counselors and advisors and can address the reality that their status in this country is always up in the air. So yeah, I guess it was a long way of just asking an open-ended question. What are things that schools like Harvard or my alma mater or Rhodes College could be doing to mimic what's happening at Guttman in a way that really supports our students throughout this pandemic?
I came to Guttman with the excitement of being able to start a college. I've been in higher ed for many decades. I was an administrator at a large Midwestern Research One university. And before that, I was faculty at an HBCU. And one of the things that really thrilled me about Guttman that is continuing in this crisis time is really looking at all of the experiences and honoring all of the experiences of students as their authority from which they speak and from which they learn, and to ignore or not to be cognizant of these surrounding issues, I think is a luxury that perhaps a Harvard or a other liberal arts or large public university outside of New York may not be able to afford anymore. Even though Melissa and I were talking last night, people talk about, was this the great equalizer? And Melissa and I kind of disagree, right? Because Melissa, you were saying, well, everyone's experiencing the same thing. And yet, no, they're really not, And I think that this conversation, and I'm really serious when I ask those of you listening today, how can we allow students who are living in this time and still have hope to unmute themselves? Our students are extremely reticent to share problems or to seek help, to be quite honest. That's considered a sign of weakness in many, cultural dimensions as well. And so how do we help them to unmute themselves, not in seeking help, but to show their tremendous hope when so many essential pieces of our democracy, of our society, of inequity and equality are in stark contrast to us who are thoughtful now, who are looking at democracy now and healthcare in different ways. I'm really eager to turn up the volume for our students. And I'll keep using that word, to unmute themselves. And so I guess I'm looking at our time too, Thomas, but I guess I'm asking you, for those who have the resources educationally, having, telecommunications students or access to student radio, I'm really interested in how we can hear student voice in the margins during this time. And it's a challenge I think I'd like to throw out there.
Does anyone on the call have any thoughts they want to share Right now, I don't want to keep jumping in to talk over you if you do. I think one question, one kind of response I've had to that is wondering the ways in which, how, kind of as you mentioned, groups already exist with student radio, student newspapers, and publications. We already kind of give students a platform. How do those things take on an elevated role going forward? And I think for me, it really is a question of what does it mean now in terms of governance for institutions of higher education? Because for so long, I think that we have accepted the idea that you have a board of trustees and they have a president and their executive staff. You have deans, you have faculty, students, and staff exist somewhere supporting all of those roles. And in the classroom space, right, I think it's one of the most, right, the grammar of schooling exists in which we enter this space and you know up front that your professor and your teaching fellow or assistant lead and follow, and you do what you're asked to do and follow their lead and guidance, right? And I think that what I have noticed happening here is that across the board, student governments have spoken up in ways that many of them have never done before. There's an example, I think, out of Berry College or Emory, one of those two schools in Georgia, where their student government issued a letter to their school's accrediting body saying, our school will not allow us to have pass-fail extended as an option. We are telling you as students, here's a petition, here's our stories, give us that right.
Wow.
Right, and I think that is just really incredible in a lot of ways because it speaks to the ways in which I do think students are finding avenues to unmute themselves. So they were saying, you know, I've respected this system, I've acknowledged its position, and I still support that, and that's why I'm working within said system. But I also want to make sure that you really do understand that we're not going to take no for an answer on these things, that our lived experiences really are telling us that the way things are not the way they ought to be. And I mean, I just think about the reality of being a student government and having the confidence and skill to talk to your school's accrediting body, to skip over your actual institutional executives. So we've had that chat with you, and you haven't gone to see what to do, and you said the power rests with them, so we'll go there instead. Right, so I mean, I really think that for me, it's an idea of what it is like for governance to change at institutions of higher education. How do students gather more voice there, particularly for schools that have students on board of trustees, so they now get to have votes? Should they be allowed to vote on these matters of great and grave importance? Do you elevate the power of student body presidents? Like, how do you, again, like using your phrasing, how do we not only unmute students, but also I think recognize you've already given students these platforms. It's our job now to actually abide by the status we've given them and listen to voices when they do speak from those positions, because you've said, here's the power you have. We should do our job as institutions to actually support that when they exercise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that. I mean, I know our students say this, and again, Melissa will bear me out on this, but you know, our building is right across the street from Bryant Park in New York City, which is a few blocks away from Times Square. 2 buildings down from our very small building is, I guess, we haven't been there for a couple weeks now, a condominium, what am I saying? Yeah, condominium development. And on the glass wall of that building that is being developed now for private housing, it says sales commencing at $1.2 million. And our students, you know, transportation is an issue. We've been able to get Metro cards so our students can come to school because they want to, and then they don't have the Metro money. And seeing these vast differences and having our students showing up in a very white space, a very commercial space, and having our little footprint, which is probably by square foot, you know, square feet, although our school is very small and very unventilated, so we can't come back in regular ways. our students' presence, their embodied presence in that area is a critique and a call to visibility that I think now up till now has been somewhat silent or silenced, as some of the businesses and initially the Bryant Park area was nervous about having Black and brown young people congregating around that area. And we've slowly, by the integrity of our students and the daily process of education, have challenged that to a point where it's a more welcoming feeling. But now how to unsilence it is my question too. And I think you're right, Thomas, about, how do we continue to empower and show students the power they do have, which is built on hope. It really is.
Being cognizant of time for our chat, I want to make sure that we have covered everyone's questions, thoughts, and comments. So give folks a few seconds to add anything else to the chat box if you would like. You can also just hit unmute on your mic there. Not seeing anything. I'll scan through our, make sure I'm not missing a hand or anything. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you to Dr. King for leading this conversation and giving us materials to take part in it. I think it's been really, really engaging, and also, as Deborah said earlier, deeply moving in a lot of ways, to really try to get some understanding of how young adults can be unmuted during this challenge and how we can then sustain and support their being unsilenced going forward, and while upholding the academic mission of our institutions, which is helping them get their degree. So thank you all for being here. I will send out a recording for this in our next newsletter. It should be available in about a day or two. And I will also let you know that next Tuesday at 2 p.m., a PhD candidate at School of Education, Raquel Jimenez, will be leading a conversation on civic engagement and the arts. That will be our last event for the semester. So we hope you join us for that. And then we will see you all next year. So many thanks again.
Okay. Thank you very much, Thomas. Thanks.